My name is James Trost, and this is A2 Insight. Today's guest is Cozine Welch. Welcome to A2 Insight.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
We're very glad to have you. Like I do with all my guests, Cozine, I'd like you to start out by giving us information about your background, where you grew up, and let's take you to your young adulthood and just give us some information so our audience can get to know a little bit more about you.
So I was born and partly raised in Detroit, Michigan. Later on in life, around the age of 8, my mother and father, working class parents, my mother with multiple sclerosis, my father a master plumber with the city of Detroit, managed to pool their funds together and move us, quote unquote, across the line on 8 Mile, and the technically Southfield School District, which made a really big difference in my life and my education in school and in my trajectory. My mother, like I said, had multiple sclerosis. My father was really working class, Southern raised, well, Southern and Detroit raised. Still in the city, though not in the city, the way suburbs skirt the city district. I was in school. I was pretty good in school in my younger years, really inquisitive, really curious, kind of a bookworm, did like book study and choose your own adventure books and things like that when in grade school. As I got older, around the age of 12 or 13, I started getting into performance arts. The middle school I went to, I had a wonderful teacher named Amy Voigt who got me into forensics and poetry before I kind of took my steer towards the streets, as they call it. So that was kind of the foundation. I had parents that were really about finding information. They got me they got an actual Encyclopedia Britannica set, which was a big deal back in the day. Like it was a symbol of status if you had one of these. And I would ask questions, and my parents would guide me to the encyclopedia, which started me young, realizing that information and knowledge was accessible to me, even if I found myself encountering barriers towards it, but that there was something that I could do to educate myself.
Now, you mentioned that you were interested in the performing arts. Your family moved out of the one part of the side of Detroit to another, and then you started to say, well, then you started to find some interest on the streets.
Yeah.
Now, what did that consist of, and what was the motivation that got you interested in that?
I think the motivation always comes around, there's always a few factors involved, right? There's never one thing that leads to anything, right? So I think it had to be familial, right? Cultural, family, Detroit, the idea of what it's like to be working class, what it's like to be a black man and woman in America and in Detroit in particular, and what that looks like, and what your cultural influences are with that. Also the idea of being young and rebellious and trying to figure out who I am, feeling a little bit uncomfortable in my surroundings in Southfield, feeling like I didn't really belong because of the racial disparity, though there was a higher racial average of blacks in Southfield, it was still this idea of a separateness, and there was always a calling home for me to Detroit, always looking to be around family that was in Detroit because there was a sense of home and community. Even if the danger increased because of the geographical area, there's still a sense of family. My family is there. My love is there. So I would always want to return to it, return to lifestyles and actions that were a part of that upbringing. So that was part of the goal in a young adult's mind, why you would constantly go back. That is where family is. That is where your base feels. Yeah.
So this pull to family and the streets, unfortunately, is going to have some negative consequences.
It does.
So
it does.
Why don't we get a sense of you're moved in Southfield, yet you're doing well, you're pulled back to the streets, but these are going to have some difficult consequences for you. And how did that progress?
So it progressed in, I guess, what we consider the typical manner of mischievousness and law breaking, not really understanding the law and the rules at 16 and 17. And it led to an altercation one day that it was a physical altercation that ended up in a shootout. Gunfire was exchanged towards myself and from myself, and at the end of the day, I was left wounded and another man was left dead.
That's a pretty severe situation.
Yeah, it's hard to make it concise.
Okay, well, it's accurate, and that's important. All right. Well, unfortunately, these things have consequences. So
Indeed.
What after this incident with this in this horrible experience? What happens to you next?
The short of it is I get sentenced to 22 to 40 years within the Michigan Department of Corrections. I'm fortunate enough to have been sentenced before the so-called Truth in Sentencing bill, which means I was still eligible to gain some good time for good behavior, which is why I got out at 19 years and 9 months as opposed to 22 years. And that was an experience, 17 years old. It's funny, sometimes I realize I spent more time incarcerated than I was alive before going. And that's a strange thing to reconcile. So what do you say about a prison experience at 17 years old? I will say this. I'm fortunate enough to be doing the things that I'm doing in my personal and professional life. But I'm aware that those things are available and that happened because I had support, right? Nothing comes out of a vacuum, right? I was able to have resources even while inside. There were people, mentors who saw me, who saw something within me, right, and fostered that so that I could become an adult while in prison. It's not something that typically happens, but there are those of us who do it. And we do it because we have a community, even inside, that allows so. And so that is, like, I think the main motivating factor that allowed me to become something more than just a recidivism statistic, or to even make it out in the first place, because some people never do. It's a vicious cycle you can get caught in. Some people never make it. Some people go to prison with a specified number of years, but end up doing something inside that never allows them to come home. And some people end up dying inside. So I think the fact that I made it through that was because I had support groups at every turn.
Well, and that is encouraging, because I think one of the, as I mentioned, some of the previous interviews we've had are the whole concept at the federal level and the state level, trying to readjust some of our punitive laws that kind of came out of the 80s and 90s with this war on crime, the crack epidemic that some of the guests that we've had on here. But, I mean, the reality is that people are going to come out regardless of their sentence. And most of us really have no idea what it's like on prison. I mean, sadly, our Hollywood views are the exciting experiences of the fictional world of Oz and the rest of that. We also are aware that depending on I've heard this from Mary King, who told us that it depends actually on the location you're in terms of how you experience it and so on. So when you say you had mentors, I mean, here you are. How old were you when you were sentenced?
I had turned 18 while in the county jail. So I actually was 18 by the time I was sentenced. Yeah.
It's pretty, But you committed the crime at 17.
17, yes, and I was 17 while in the county jail. By the time I got sentenced, I had turned 18.
Right. Well, this was another, we've dealt with this raise the age situation. That's new. But let's just take if a frightened 18-year-old is convicted of this crime, where do you go? Where are you sent? I know that prisons usually are outstate. They're not conveniently located for family members. Just give me the sense of what it's, first, let's say the 5-year adjustment. This is your life at 18 when other kids your age are not necessarily. What is it? You said you had a mentor, but what else was provided? Not only the educationally, but services that were that really made the difference for you in your own getting your life together inside. Well,
in those first years, I won't say there were many resources offered by the department or any other group that aided. It was simply I was able to get my GED, but that was more. It's done in a way of punitive, right? So you can get your GED, or you are forced to attend so many hours of class and then confined to your cell if you refuse to go to those classes. So there's incentive, right? So it's not as if I got my GED because I was just really trying to forge my path, forward. I just didn't want to have to be. I did not want to be incarcerated, serving 22 to 40 years, and then being made to go to classes, right? So I took getting my GED seriously, and I passed it. Took my first time and passed it. Took the half test. Never had to attend a day in class, which was really cool. I just took like the study book home to my cell and just read through it. But it was really about the community of people, because I'm young, I'm impressionable, I'm afraid, I'm angry. I'm so many emotions that I don't understand nor know how to deal with or express. My brain hasn't finished developing, right? But I was fortunate enough to find members of groups inside, like the Nation of Islam, the Moorish Science Temple of America, a lot of so-called controversial groups. But these are groups that for a young black man are important because they give you a sense of family as well as a sense of adulthood, right? To let you know that you are going from things of a child into things of a man or an adult. And unfortunately, the situation has made it so that you don't have a choice. It's either survive or don't. And I was fortunate enough to find groups of men from those particular organizations and others that saw me as a young black man in America and said, okay, here's what you need. Here's something to help you find your way. And so my first 5 years, the Nation of Gods and Earth is another one, very, very influential to me understanding how it is okay to be intelligent. A lot of things in so-called suburban areas and educational deserts, as I call them, the idea of being intelligent isn't exactly fostered. Not because people aren't intelligent, but because you need a different type of intelligence to survive in a different type of environment. And typically the scholastic intelligence is not the one you need to survive in the urban environment, unfortunately. And so it seems to me, I think that a scholastic education is therefore looked down upon a lot. For that and various other reasons that are cultural and cyclical, as well as institutional. But that is one reason, I think. But I was fortunate enough, again, like I said, that there were men who were like, okay, learn. And it is okay to learn. Like I said, we used to actually study, and we would do what we called plus degrees, which was we would take a topic and we would have to research it and present an essay about it, right? We had to do our own research, right? This is college level work outside of that institution. And I had never experienced it, nor had it ever been given to me or presented to me in a way that showed that when I completed it, I had done not just something right, but something admirable, right? If I found a new perspective on something, even if my new perspective did not logically add up, it was still given the opportunity to be expressed and then broken down to see if it was valid or not. That was important.
Well, and you're saying you've got inmates inside the system, various organizations, the nation, and so on. Is the motivation, is it the teachers, the educators themselves in the programs, or are you getting most of your education from other inmates?
I'm getting most of my education from other inmates.
So it's not somebody coming in from the outside to teach you a class on Shakespeare or something like this.
No. Especially not at this time in the 90s, the late 90s. There was this weird shift between the early 90s and the late 90s where a lot of programming and things were being taken out of the institution. Right. Yeah.
Right. Okay, well then I'm going to move this along because this is fascinating. I mean, the encouragement came from other prisoners who saw in you as someone that was worthwhile and could find the importance and the value of learning, obviously. And then you kind of moved into this, as I thought was interesting, and one of the reasons I wanted to, somehow you got involved with this organization of writing. You actually found that the skill of writing, or the craft of writing, was an interest area of yours, and you've been really quite impressively successful. But tell me a little bit more about how you got into writing as a vocation while in the prison world.
So my writing came from my first passion, which was music. Like many young people in my area, I styled myself as an MC. And so lyrics were important. Listening to music, writing lyrics was important. And so I was doing that. And, there's an acronym sometimes used for rap, which is rhythm and poetry. And I was kind of schooled along that train of thought. So even when I was rapping, my words seemed to be poetic to me. As far as I knew of poetry, I had no formal training in poetry. I had one instance when I was in middle school when I wrote a poem, was fortunate enough to get on public access television. But that was like sixth grade. It was not something that forged a career or made me think like, oh, I'm a writer. But as I got older inside, and I changed and I grew and my perspectives grew, the things I spoke about changed. And so for me, rapping in the way that was popular was no longer something I could do because I didn't believe in what I was saying. And I didn't want to pretend that I was someone I wasn't. And I didn't want to promote something that I didn't agree with. I started getting more into the actual form of poetry when I came across an advertisement in one of my housing units when I was at Lapeer Correctional Facility for the Michigan Review of Prisoner Creative Writing. It was their second volume. It was new. Under the Prison Creative Arts Project. This was a new endeavor, and they were looking for people to submit. I had tried to get into a writing workshop at the time at that facility, but they were packed. I mean, when U of M has a workshop, it's not, especially at this time, a new workshop, it was hard to get into. So I was not able to get into it, but I still submitted to the review. And when I submitted a poem I wrote about my mother to this review, it got accepted. And that changed things for me, right? Because we are conditioned, and we know from experience that our institutions that are lifted up, whenever they give something the thumbs up, right, that carries a lot of weight, whether we're aware of it or not. And so in my situation, with the fact that the University of Michigan thought my writing good enough to publish, changed something a little bit, right? And so that was when things started.
So what was this first article that you wrote that was submitted to the University of Michigan, and what was it about?
So it was a piece of poetry called A Wish for Release, which is written about my mother and gives the imagery of tears and rain and the idea that after you kind of have suffered inside prison for so long, you no longer are able to cry. this release you're given, you're no longer able to do. In fact, you have to do it in your dreams. And mine was how I would, in my sleep, I would have to cry because in reality, I just was not able to anymore.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, getting the recognition from the university all of a sudden that now, hey, you've got something,
Yeah.
talent here.
Yeah. Yeah.
What effect did that, and you're 26 years old, you submit this, and then you get the recognition. How does that affect you're now at the point you're in prison about 8 years now. How did that change your next 5 to 10 years?
It changes significantly because it happened at a particular period in time where I was making an adult transition, right? I was going from the things of youth to the things of feeling like a real adult. Like, what do I do? What type of person am I going to be? And all these things happened in those couple of years where everything kind of changed. I had a job where I was called a legal writer. So what I was doing was I was preparing post-conviction briefs and remedies for people who couldn't read or who had English as a second language or any other reason why they could not put together a brief or document themselves. And that changed me. I've got a 40-hour work week. I'm working like 8 to 4. And I'm doing serious work that is not just serious in the fact of its impact, but also serious in the fact that it makes me be responsible and accountable to another human being in a way that I hadn't had to before when there was someone I did not know. Right now I have to approach someone as just a human being who needs my assistance and figure out how do I do that in the best way possible. And when I can't do anything good for them, how do I let them know? Not only that I've done the best I can, but to understand what they find themselves in. Often I would find myself being a counselor more than anything because sometimes when it comes to post-conviction remedies, there is nothing that can be done, right? But how do you explain that to someone so they can deal with having to spend 20 years of their life inside with no hope of release, right? And so it became a thing about speaking to individuals and people, finding commonality so that I could find a way to get through it and help them understand that though one door may have closed, life itself did not.
Well, and then let's lead that to your interactions with others. I mean, here you are, you've been in there 10 years. It can't be the most pleasant of experiences, to say the least.
No.
But you're also getting recognition, you're learning how to write, you're writing poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I would think for the other inmates or those who are incarcerated, this is kind of you're also now shifting your role to those other sadly younger inmates coming in.
Mm-hmm.
How is the recognition of your writing ability and then you're working full time? How is that affecting, how do you then shift your role, the longer you're in someone to deal with some poor soul that's coming in that was your age and 19, 20 years old? Do you see your role shifting now that we're into your 10th, 15th year of how you relate to those new folks coming in or a role you might perform? In a mentor type role yourself, which you claimed you had when you were initially coming into?
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful thing about this kind of informal way of growth is that it's so communal. And you find yourself going from one role into the next just naturally. It's a seamless transition. You go from being from learning to teaching because even when you teach, you're still learning, right? So in particular, when I was at Lapeer, you had a lot of the Homes Youthful Trainee Act young men there. So these are young men 13 to 18, sometimes to 20, 21, depending upon circumstance, situation. And so I would have to do the same thing for them. And one of the things that I noticed was how important it was to find commonality. One, you have to find a common base that you both can connect on, right? And that may be nothing to do with the reason you've come here. We come to speak about law, but I may have to talk about some MC or some rapper to kind of find a common base. I may have to talk about a neighborhood. Somewhere I have to find something to cause us to realize that, oh, okay, we are the same. We are here together. And also realizing one of the things I think that was the most important was realizing that sometimes you aren't ready for a message or you're not ready for a piece of information. I think of my own personal life. I think of things my father, my mother, cousins, people who cared about me may have told me when I was, say, 14. But I didn't understand it until 26 or 27. But because it was told to me at 14, when I encountered it at 26, I was already primed to accept it. It was somehow familiar. And so realizing that something I may say to someone right now is not going to affect change at this moment, but may be used in the future to affect change. So even if I don't see an immediate result, it does not negate the reason or the necessity to do it. I still have to say and share in some way.
Well, and I think this is particularly dealing with kids who were in trouble on the wrong side of the streets, perhaps. I mean, I think a lot of us have this impression that they're there was this program, I know they don't do it anymore, called Scared Straight.
Yeah.
You know, drag kids in and tell them, you know, we're going to scream at these kids and somehow that's going to make an impression.
Right, right.
What was your approach to seeing the kid who's going down the wrong path? Now you're 20. Let's say you're, well, I want to get us out of prison because you've got life after that. But okay, you're 30 years old now, and are you still at the pier? What
No, at 30, by the time I had turned 30, I think I was in Pugsley Correctional Facility by Traverse City. I think I was.
Well, why are you moved around? Why does this happen?
There's so many different reasons, right? So there's reasons that can be done with housing. There are reasons that can have something to do with security level. So that can be initiated by the prisoner or by the institution. For instance, I can exhibit behaviors that are against the rules, and that can cause me to accumulate points, which causes a level raise increase, so I go to a more restrictive environment. It also can be something as simple as a staff member feels there is something that may have happened and institutes an investigation and does what's called a notice of intent, and that is a notice of intent to conduct a hearing on investigation, and they may deem after that investigation that I should not be on the compound. There's so many different reasons, right? Ones that you initiate yourself as a prisoner and that are forced upon you. For instance, with the legal rider, a lot of times I moved because I needed to be places where they needed a legal rider, right? And for instance, when I went to Pugsley, it was because they needed a legal rider at Pugsley. And they ask you, hey, are you willing to transfer? They don't tell you where, but are you willing to transfer? And you're like, oh, okay, what's going on? Well, we need a legal rider here. That was my particular situation. We need a legal rider at another institution. Are you willing to transfer? Okay, sure. And then I find out where I go when I get there.
Okay, so you don't know other than this is and that would be the question. You might get a dud.
You might.
A worse
you
place,
might. Yeah,
right?
you might.
So let me just, again, you've dealt with kids, you're helping them in Lapeer. Now we're at Pugsley. How does Pugsley differ from Lapeer, and how long are we going to be there?
We'll be at Pugsley for around 4 years or so. And Pugsley is a good example of how institutions change depending upon policy. Because Pugsley, when I first got there, was relatively okay as far as prisons go. It's a housing, it's what we call the warehouse setting. So you're pretty much a bunch of cubicles inside of a warehouse.
Okay.
And so that was a shift because I was used to, having done longer time, I was used to having cells and the security and privacy, limited security and privacy that came with the cell. Now you're just in open bays. And there's a lower security level, so there's a larger, so you have people who have done 20 and people who have done 20 years and people who have done 20 months. So there's a difference in what we call jailing, which is the act of doing time. And there's a difference you're taught when you are doing large indeterminate sentences, how you're taught to quote unquote jail is different than how you're taught when you're doing, say, 20 months. Sure. And so that was a shift. And that environment ended up getting more and more violent as years progressed on, because of, again, changes in policy, the way they group prisoners, all these things that contribute.
Sure.
Because it's not as if somehow America or the prison system got any more violent in those years.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, then, all right. We don't want to spend too much time.
Right.
We're very interested on living in the system, and I think that the key is you survive the system. I'm sure you've got horror stories and of your life there, and that's ready for your book when you write that somewhere down the line. But let's find out. Okay, you've been in the system 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Total 20 or 22?
Total 20.
20 years, and then you're, I guess, apply for parole, or what happens? Are you just goodbye, get out, good luck? What happens to you?
So what happens is you have a parole date coming up, which is your earliest chance to see the parole board. A series of papers are done gauging your life in prison, whatever your term of years was. And then this report is presented to the parole board. The parole board either calls to see you personally, a member from the parole board, or sometimes a panel, depending upon situation and circumstance. And sometimes you don't see a parole board member at all. These things are determined by the parole board, sure, whether or not they think they should see you. Typically, when you've done a long period of time, they want to see you, as they should. So I see a parole board member. We talk about what my parole plans are. At this time, I'm fully into the University of Michigan. I've been in the lit review for like 9 consecutive years at this time. I have support letters from staff at University of Michigan. I have the Linkage Project. I have a community to go to. And the parole board sees that, and they grant me my parole. The irony of this is that, so my mother, My mother had multiple sclerosis her whole life. I write about it pretty frequently. And she was at kind of a bad space health-wise, but, holding on. No one assumed anything was wrong with her because nothing was wrong with her. And so I go to, so we've waited, we've waited 20 years for this moment. I see the parole board on the Tuesday. I see the parole board. I talked to my mother on a Tuesday to let her know I had been granted my parole, and she passed that Thursday. And my mother is, she's obviously significant because it's my mother. But that's where the seed of my writing ability comes from. Because my mother used to write when she was younger. She had dreams of writing children's books, and she would write poetry. And she was the most proud of what I was doing as a writer. So
it's tough.
Yeah, that was because I had lost my grandmother, her mother, 9 months prior. So it was a series of blows, and to kind of have it happen when this is supposed to be such great news. Yeah, that was.
Well, okay.
Sorry.
No, this is life. This is the reality, and this is your situation. And everyone's ultimately dealing with death as part of a life. I'm interested now that we're out. You've got support systems. You've been very well known for years now, working with this literature program in conjunction with the University of Michigan. And I'll get to where you're going with that in the future, because we want to talk about your future. Mm-hmm. But I'm kind of interested. 20 years in prison. A lot happens in the world in 20 years. I'm interested in knowing just from a young man. And how old are you when you get out?
I was 37.
Okay, 37. 20 years. Tell me what you saw in the world around you that you had no idea. It must be some difficulty adjusting to what you saw around you. Was it just anything that pops out that was different? Obviously the way of life, but technologically, just the way the culture changed, any different major differences?
So I'll talk about some weird things that with me in particular, because I think they're hopeful. And that is, for me, the technological transition, and a lot of transitions weren't that difficult. But the reason being, for instance, I was a legal writer. So because I was a legal writer, I had access to a desktop computer 5 days a week, right? I understood about emails and graphic user interfaces. I also was fortunate enough to take a business management course and get an associate's degree, which gave me more information about what the outside world looked like outside of my television screen, and how it looked as far as how to apply skills and what they look like in real life application. And that helped me. So when I came home, I was ready for technology, right? I picked up a smartphone and I studied it, right? I was familiar with how folders work, filing work, right? How systems and settings worked. I was familiar with that because I was fortunate enough to have had that experience with the laptop. So technology was a barrier I was fortunate enough to not have to overcome. It's unfortunate that there aren't more of us like that. That should be a regular occurrence. I deal with that a lot with community workshop and reentry workshops that we do, how difficult it is to facilitate that transition. The hardest thing, though, was when you're inside, you get used to people being temporary. That's a psychological thing that does not go away so easily. So I'll give you an example. You and I may be in a room together for 9-10 months. Doesn't seem like a lot of time, but when you can consider we're spending 21 to 23 hours a day together, we get to know each other. And in that space, you become, especially with someone you get along with, you form a bond of not just friendship, but a roommate, a friend, someone to help you when times get rough, someone who may be called upon to be your protection or to help protect you against physical violence. There's all types of things you have to take into consideration. And then one day at 6 p.m., 4 p.m., he's told that he's leaving. And by 5 a.m. that next morning, he's gone. And someone else will take his place. This is someone you spent time with, someone you went to meals with, and now they're gone. And that happens over and over and over. It's not just with your family that it happens when you go inside. Your life becomes a cycle of these temporary relationships. And the department puts into play policies that make it even more difficult for you to communicate. So if I get really close to you and you leave, now I can't even write you to communicate, because that is a violation of policy. We can't communicate as prisoners unless we're biologically brother or right. So now you're forging bonds, but they're being cut, and that becomes your normal. So like out here, I'll be completely honest, it's hard for me to maintain relations with a lot of people who I care about because I'm just not used to people being that present. I'm used to them being temporal. So when someone's gone, I've developed the ability, I suppose, at one point it was an ability, now it's become a detriment, to kind of just move on. Which makes it really hard now to forge meaningful and lasting relationships. My best friends who I teach and co-edit with, Philip Christman and Dr. Ashley Lucas, we had a talk maybe a few months ago, and I told them how it was strange that I realized, like, I might know you guys the rest of my life. And that is a possibility is new. And the same thing goes with family. It's hard to readjust to family now because I'm used to not my aunts, right? I love them to death, but I'm used to not talking to them that much. So even now that I can, it's become something that I have to make a part of normalcy now because it hasn't been.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I would hope that I think that's something that will change over time. It does kind of go back to the idea that we sentence people at a young age who haven't really fully developed.
Yeah.
There are certain aspects of traditional growth that you missed.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
by being incarcerated, say the mind doesn't really fully develop until you're 25. You know, so I mean that's it. But all right, well, the good news, and I want to end this on a positive note because I think it's important. It's not easy to be in prison. It's not easy. We know there, and again, this is we're not going after the system. We want to see people make it. We don't like 50% recidivism rates. We want to get this rate down because people are coming out.
Yeah.
This era of punitive measures hasn't functioned. The building of new prisons hasn't worked.
It has not worked.
But you are a success story. And that is, I think what you've told us is that you got the help while you were in the inside, you got around, you found an interest area of yours. So I guess you get out, what are you doing now and maybe it's interesting, I don't know, you probably don't want to think too far in the future, I would think, given what you just stated. It's hard for you to see these permanent aspects, but you're working at the university. Could you explain what the courses you're teaching and how did this come about? Your role and what are these specific courses?
Okay, so I co-teach 2 courses. Last 2 semesters I taught them with Dr. Ashley Lucas, who was the co-founder of the Atonement Project, which is one class, and is the actual director of the Prison Creative Arts Project. What
department is this in?
This is in a residential college. This class in particular is in a residential college. We have another which is in the School of Music, Theater, and Dance on North Campus, and that is the Theater and Incarceration course. Okay. So the Atonement Project focuses on the idea of reconciliation and atonement. We use traditional, we speak of traditional indigenous means, as well as what that looks like in our new technologically advanced society. We also delve into stories of incarceration and stories of people affected by incarceration, as well as stories that speak on law and civil studies to kind of show what the carceral state and how all the parties that need to be involved for atonement to take place. Atonement is not something that simply takes place from the offender. The society, the person who was offended against, all 3 have to agree and have to work towards atonement and reconciliation. The other class I co-teach is called Theater and Incarceration, which is on North Campus in the School of Music, Theater, and Dance, again with Dr. Ashley Lucas. And that focuses on the role that theater, because we do theater creative workshops, right? The role that theater has played in incarceration as far as rehabilitation and incarceration and theater's responses to incarceration, most times inside correctional settings. So we'll talk about Shakespeare in prison, other theater programs like the Prison and Creative Arts Project. We have others. For instance, one of the great things is every semester we take our students to Florianopolis in Rio, Brazil. We have counterparts in Rio and Florianopolis who do this same similar work in the favelas and in institutions over there. Right, so we show that this is a world thing. As long as you've had incarceration of some sort, you've had theater inside it as a response to it. There's always some artistic outpouring when people are confined, because there's an artistic outpouring from people in general. So why would confinement be any different?
Well, that is particularly, I mean, the arts and relating to incarceration and atonement theater, I think that's an interesting expression also. So now, when were you released?
So I was released in September of 2017.
So we're looking at, you've been out, it'll be 2 years coming in September.
Yep.
You've been through a lot.
Yeah.
You know, coming out and doing that. So I guess the thought is you said you're going to Washington Community College.
Washington Community College right now.
So let's not look too far down the line. I mean,
Okay.
you know, I mean, hopefully this isn't the case, but you know, there's a percentage that aren't going to make it. I don't want that to be you, and we don't want to be anybody. But let's take a look at what you've now obviously you're young, you've got a life ahead of you. What do you hope to accomplish, let's just say, in the next 5 years? You have, you know, now that you're out, in terms of your own academic or career goals, letting the past go, what do you hope to see yourself in a few years from now?
So within 5 years from now, I like to see myself as a graduate from the Helen Zell's writing program here at the University of Michigan with my master's in fine arts. I like to see, because that's a terminal degree, so I'd be able to teach with it. I like to see my involvement, because I'm now the managing editor of the Prison and Creative Arts, Michigan Review of Prison and Creative Writing. So I'd like to see that expand. I'd like to see that do more of what it does best right now. It's not one of those things where I think I have to fix anything. I just have to add to, which is great. So I'd like to see that really as expansive as it can be, as expansive or close to as expansive as our art show is, which is our really big draw in. We see a lot of beautiful artwork from prisoners across Michigan. I also would like to have something done with my music. I've kind of started taking that more seriously. I've taught myself to play guitar, and so we have a podcast on the PCAP called the While We Were Away podcast, which is created by formers for formers to kind of let you know what you will experience upon returning that may not be in the quote-unquote booklet, right? And for that, I do like the theme music for that, so it's been getting me more into my music, so I like to take that more seriously. My writing, I would like to be published a couple of times by then. I'd like to be doing more performances and speaking engagements like I do now. But more, what I really would like, so I would really like to find, and not much of this has to do with me as an individual, but it's still where I hope 5 years to be, and that is to be in a position at the University of Michigan where people like me are welcomed. And I say people like me, not just who have felony convictions, but people who look like me, people who come from where I come from, people who represent what Southeastern Michigan, a nice chunk of what Southeastern Michigan looks like. It would be nice if the flagship school of Southeastern Michigan reflected that. So we're making inroads to that because these things have to be done by the community, by the citizenry, right? If it's a public institution, the public has to let the institution know what they want. So in the process of doing that with the carceral state symposiums, I like to see those make a real fundamental difference. They have been making a difference. I would hope that the difference they make within 5 years will be really impactful and allow us to do much more good, like PCAP and other organizations like us hope to see. So yeah, that's my 5 years looks as busy as my present is. But just more solidified in the changes that I hope to see come about. I'm hoping to have more roots laid.
Well, we're glad to have you here in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here.
At the university. It's an amazing story, and I truly wish you the best of luck. And as I said at the end, we will give you the website to contact the Michigan, and again, I want to get that name again. It is the Michigan Review of Prisoner Creative Writing Program, and I assume this includes a lot of good writers that are currently in and out of the system.
Yes.
Cozine Welch, thank you very much for being here today on A2 Insight. And until next time, for A2 Insight, I'm James Trost.